Assalamu alaikum. I'm trying to find the presentation here on this desktop. I thought it was going to be set up here. Someone here can help me with where's my presentation, please? Well, it doesn't matter.
No, it is on.
Okay, it's okay. When it comes,
It's on the hard disk.
You think it'll help him?
Should be here.
No, it's icons.
Let this go out. Which one, Dr. Muhammad?
There we go.
Mاجد?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. All right.
This isn't the final one I sent you.
It's okay.
It's okay. That's fine. That's fine.
I had like 5 of them.
Okay. Well, when Dr. Hussein Amin asked me to contribute to this forum, I gave some thought as to what subject should I be covering. And I tried to get an idea of the audience. And what slant should I give? This is not the final presentation. I can find it about that. I can check it. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to backtrack, and I'm going to start by thanking Sheikh Aida for her generosity and all of the excellencies. The work you do here is very important. And when I started to think about what should I talk about, I saw that there may be quite a few different interests. Somebody who would be interested in where should I invest, somebody who should be interested in what should I research, somebody could be interested in what kind of company I would work in. So I thought that I'd go back and look at how we develop knowledge and how this accretion of knowledge happens, and then how does that become reflected in business practice? How do I translate what I've learned into something makes money? And I'm going to start off by simply going back to something we all know. How do we actually get to know something? When we started learning, Subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the tools with which to learn. And if we go back and think about it, to learn something, to know something, we go through 8 stages. The first thing is that we simply observe. When an infant is born, we just notice that this infant is looking around, is observing, and we register. And then we start to detect patterns in whatever we've registered. And then we wonder about why does this pattern exist? And then we start to hypothesize. Oh, this pattern of behavior we're observing is because of this. And that becomes a hypothesis. And then we start to test that hypothesis. And we either prove it's true and it turns into a bit of knowledge, or it's not true and we cycle back through the cycles. And to develop knowledge, once we've grown up, all what we needed when we started developing knowledge is just enough resource to sustain just one mind. If we think of Plato or Abu Hamid al-Ghazali or Ibn Sina, these are individuals who would just sit and reflect. And they would think, and they would go through the process of hypothesizing and testing. And they come up with ideas, and there is an exchange of ideas. That's very simple knowledge, and we didn't need very much in terms of instrumentation. And we didn't need databases. It's just one person, and when we developed paper, that's all the recording we needed to do. And then layers of knowledge became much more complex, until in the last 6 or so generations, not much more than that, all of a sudden there's a huge explosion in the amount of knowledge that we're accreting. And the accretion of knowledge starts in bits and bytes of information, tiny bits and bytes of information, but they become essentially an avalanche of information. And that avalanche came as a result of many people coming together with many different ideas. They came as a result of automating the process of observation itself. We automate how we observe things. When we think of somebody who's working in astronomy, yeah? So we have an observatory, and we essentially automate the observatory. It opens, and then the telescope would start to swing, and whether we're talking about a radio telescope or an optical telescope, they're automated. And we collect trillions of bits and bytes. So the observation and registration is all automated. We even automate the process of detecting patterns. We have software for detecting patterns. All of these processes, that's interesting. We went from just enough resource to sustain one human being to all kinds of people working on things, doing things. Well, how do we finance this stuff? So all of a sudden, along the way, we started to develop other knowledge bases. That somebody had to sell something to somebody to be able to get the resource to mobilize a whole bunch of people to do things to feed this cycle. And there are businesses that are evolving. The business of research, initially, which is something very interesting and somehow got forgotten along the way in our part of the world. If we go back to the history of how the Muslims accreted knowledge, the cost of knowledge accretion was paid for through endowments, awqaf. In Andalus, the awqaf business, the endowment business, the endowments that we know that Harvard and Stanford and Oxford and all these large institutes cover the biggest part of their cost through endowments. That's a concept that we developed. An endowment for the purpose of developing knowledge. That's how we finance. Now, we have to find another way that is going on in the finance of knowledge. And I'm going to use 4 examples, corporate examples. One of them is Apple, and the other 3, are a company called Reed Elsevier, and they were a publisher, and a company called Walmart, and a company called La Roche. Now, how do these companies, the 4 of them, have benefited from all this amounts of information? Do they accrete that information? How do they use that information? I want to feed back to the business of, if we want to create opportunity, if we want to investigate opportunity, if we want to manage where we invest, we need to look at how we're making use of actually huge, incredibly large amounts of information that 10 years ago nobody would have thought of. Let's look at somebody like Walmart. Walmart is the largest company in the world in terms of 2 measures. One measure is total turnover, the revenue. In 2012, they're projected to generate something like $450 billion. And in terms of total employment, they have 2.2 million people working for them out of 8,500 outlets in 15 countries. This company was established in 1962. That's 50 years ago. So in 50 years, it grew from nothing to 450 billion. That's almost $10 billion a year in a straight line. How does a company get to do that? Sam Walton started operating a tiny store, and it was called the 5 and Dime store. So what he sold were all items costing 5 cents and 10 cents in a place called Bentonville in Arkansas. How does this man get to do this? In 78, Sam Walton invested $24 million in satellite-based audio, video, and data. Voice, data, and video. 1978. There was no TCP/IP. Nobody had heard of ICANN. I don't think DARPA was even thinking about that at this scale that we're talking about at this point. Yeah? And here's a man. They held a meeting every Saturday, and every store manager had to report that meeting. If there is a stock item that is not selling in any one store, that stock item was moved from this store to another store. And they kept track of every register, every stock item on a computer through that data network. 1978. They still do that. $450 billion. If the average bill is $100, that's 5 billion transactions a year. And if that bill has 10 SKUs in it, that's 500 billion pieces of information on SKUs. That's the extent of information that companies use. La Roche. La Roche was a pharmaceutical. Yeah? In the last 10 years, they bought Genentech. Genentech is a company that specializes in human genomes. Human genome research generates an incredible amount of information. Incredible, huge amount of information. Now let's look. If I'm designing drugs, I need to know how to activate a gene, how to deactivate a gene. That's the future. So if I have 35,000 genes in the human body, then I need to activate and deactivate, and I have hundreds of thousands, millions of potential molecules, plus all of the environmental impacts, including the tendency in the mother's womb. All of these things affect how genes get expressed or not expressed. Now, you can imagine the extent, huge amount of information that I have to dig through. Large-scale informatics in pharmaceuticals. So now La Roche specializes in computer-aided drug designs and in diagnostic tools. Now we go back now to the other company, Reeds Elsevier. They used to print, just print. Up until about 15 years ago, they owned an awful lot of magazines, paper magazines, and that's what they did. And then they made a transformation. They bought a company called LexisNexis. And LexisNexis is an interesting experiment that started by the Bar Association, which is an association of lawyers in Ohio, to put on a database court cases, judgments, and petitions. Now, LexisNexis covers all of the court cases ever in the United States, all of the petitions ever, all of the judgments, and it's not PDFs, it's not microfilm, it's all digitized. So now they're looking at context searches. Now here's a lot of work. Now how many of our young people will be interested in context search in Arabic? How much do we know about linguistics of Arabic and how to model that arithmetically and develop computer models so that we can do context searches, not keyword search? That's an enormous amount of business to teach people to do research in. Yeah? And they went and bought a company that has information, personal information, on something like 220 million people in North and South America. Everything they did, their traffic tickets and where they have loans from. Now, what kind of power that have? The presentation had some stuff, and I'm sure it's going to be on the web page, you can look at it, but not only I did just press these, just snapshots of the companies, but I also have a snapshot of their financial performance. The point I'm trying to make is that if we want to look at opportunity to develop and to contribute to the world as opposed to consume what has been developed and thought out elsewhere, there is endless amount of work, endless opportunity to do that. I thank you for your kind attention. I think that's enough.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for the overview, and I think from this orientation we're going to raise some interesting questions. But before we do that, I would also like to get the other side of policies and regulations from Dr. Habballah. So Dr. Habballah will speak to us today on the rules and regulations. Yes.